Okay, I want to cover this post on the PMC forum by Override. It says a certain base crusher post inspired me to give a bit of my thoughts regarding our attitude towards stats, papers, etc. See if I can't get a little bigger. There we are. I empathize deeply with the narrative that research and papers published can be misleading and that believing in said things can mislead. Everybody gets misled from time to time, and in fact, having peers correct you for the error of your thinking is a very common thing personally. For example, I used to have wildly overestimated figures of the Russia-Ukraine war in my head, swimming about for a while, till someone recently clarified that for me. I'd like to try to give a short story on research and scientific literature as a whole to try to get people to have a better appreciation about how scientific literature or stats get corrupted. Now, this quote here from a politician who lost his campaign due to lies pitched about being psychologically impaired. This was actually cited by Mark Twain, as it turns out. He in turn claimed it to have been from a British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli. The idea is to perpetuate this idea that stats and, in general, authoritative figures are not to be trusted. It can be useful in emboldening oppressed groups, including us definitely, but I really think there is a silver lining to properly following stats in particular. And we, of course, know of a good number of examples of that. I therefore would like to push back against the idea that data or studies should not help us or are worth dismissing. Even as a lie, the way a paper reveals itself can be quite helpful in our cause. Now, the battered husband syndrome. A paper published all the way in 1977 explained the fact that in those times, the media was routinely depicting men as domestic abuse victims and found it relatable or funny or favorable content. With regard to domestic type comic strips, stats revealed that in 73% of the stripped, the women were more aggressive, and 10% husband and the wife were equal. And in 17%, the male was more aggressive. The comic strips had a surprisingly large following. 56% of both male and female readers ranked them as most commonly read. The authors suggest that comic strips both reflect family life and lifestyles and reinforcing family-related behavior. Steinmetz was met with bomb threats at her daughter's wedding and her home. Holy snap. Oh my God. Okay. Aaron Pizzey, who erected the first domestic shelter. From my understanding, she opened a shelter from a battered woman at the time. After some time, she realized that of the first 100 women through her doors, 62 were as violent as the men they were fleeing. Pizzey was picketed, threatened with death, and eventually driven into decades-long exile from the UK. You'll notice, where were the police in all this, right? Challenging the narrative laid out in papers is what drove them into danger. And there's another common theme here between feminist and the peer review system within research. That is gatekeeping. The invention of the anonymous gatekeeper. How did this culture of suppression move from bomb threats to permanent part of science? They took over peer-reviewed systems. Most people assume peer review is as an ancient neutral standard for truth. In reality, its institutionalization was a Cold War development. Now, this is something I didn't know. 1940s and 50s, scientists feared that the government which was funding them to fight the Soviets, would start controlling their labs. They created peer review as an administrative protective shield. They told the state, you give us the money, but only we, the peers, get to decide what counts as truth. Now, feminists in the 70s and 80s saw an opportunity in this closed club. They pushed for two critical changes and effectively uninstalled accountability. Now, the anonymous reviewers, by making the gatekeepers ghost, they ensured that the reviewer could kill a study on male victimhood or female aggression, including taboo topics like female pedophilia. In the shadows, they never had to face the public or the researchers they were silencing. See how that works? The standpoint filter. They popularized standpoint theory, which argued that objectivity was a male myth. This is exemplified by some of the works of Dale Spender. This meant that research only passed review if it aligned with the marginalized narrative. Of course, the people who claim to be marginalized, the women, aren't. It's the opposite. If your data painted women in a harsh light, it was rejected, not for being false, but for being harmful. Most scientific journals have a clause gatekeeping against work that might potentially discriminate against gender, race, etc., which is, of course, untrue. It's the reverse. This is done to discriminate against the male gender. And the truth can never be harmful, by the way. So if they're against the truth, they are causing harm. Journals function as a safe space for women to spew their hate unchallenged. Of course, I hope we all know to not be as gullible as that. We know what this is for, as for example, shows. Because of course they show, use of incursive language, age, gender, race. Identifying intersectional feminist principles in the One Health framework. Highlights. The relationship between feminist theory and One Health is understudied, but is complementary and even symbiotic. One Health successfully queers the Enlightenment health binary that artificially divorces human and non-human health. Okay, this is bizarre shit. The guidelines explicitly go against gendered language, but this journal is a typical example of who is really in charge. This is like an Israeli being put in charge of governing against apartheid, extremism, and war crimes in the area. Now, the silver lining, data always wins. Here's the real silver lining. Despite the feminist design of peer review and the scrubbing of female violence from the official papers, the truth is a mechanical reality that eventually reveals itself. The truth is harder to kill than the researchers. Even with the corrupted system, we can use sniff tests to find fingerprints of the gatekeepers. One, leverage and influence, finding the cheat. To keep things simple, these two measurements and data to show that quantify how crucial certain data points are to coming to a conclusion. This sort of bias is something better illustrated with an example, but is the equivalent of straw man theory. 2, the perforator of war, driving and driven variables. Stats usually phrases variables as either being independent, a driver, or dependent variable. Some people view these as ways to suggest that A causes B. War and the female vote is a good example. We are often taught that women's emancipation, in scare quotes, right, getting the vote, was a reward for their help in World War I, or as a result of the loosening of the patriarchal power structures that led to said war. thus giving women the opportunity to slip away from their oppression. But that has routinely been almost impossible to prove without some leaps of faith, as opposed to sentiments such as following, as shown in the war and the political zeitgeist. Closely related strand of literature examines and determines female suffrage expansion empirically. These people evaluate this decision among U.S. states, showing that states with sex ratios skewed in favor of men were more likely to extend suffrage. Wow. I'm going to read that again. Decision among U.S. states that show that states with sex ratios skewed in favor of men were more likely to extend suffrage. Okay. Okay. So men are of course worship women and want them to do better. Right? Suggesting an important role for the relative size of population and influence the cost of enfranchisement. The authors also find that states with larger manufacturing centers and higher levels of Catholicism were less likely to extend suffrage. Oh, okay. In a cross-country setting, studies female suffrage extension among the samples, 22 countries over the period of 1870 to 1930. It shows that richer countries were more likely to extend female suffrage earlier, while more Catholic countries and countries where women had already had the ability to divorce were less likely to do so. She also finds that the inclusion of a dummy for 1920 is positive in significance. I don't know what that means. Suggesting that World War I might have accelerated the timing of suffrage, but finds no stat significance to the interaction between this variable and the other regressors. Okay. I won't pretend I know anything about what that means. She finds that the inclusion of the dummies, oh yeah, I read that. This scenario above, by the way, is better explained with feminist female emancipation being driving force for war as opposed to a variable dependent on war. Okay, so that's what it means. Okay. Where there's a lot of other slipshod theories that are possible, given the soliciting pressure women have always had in maintaining instruments of war, or perpetuating war with shame, such as white feather movement, I think my answer here is the more sensible one. I find feminist suggestions to be verbal pretzels, trying to explain away uncomfortable realities about the roles women have always played in perpetuating war. All right. Now, when I mentioned the white feathers, people try and run to the women's rescue and say, oh, no, the government, they urged them to do that, right? When, no, these women wanted to do this. This was their idea. There are, of course, a lot of other problematic tropes that are paraded around to this day. For example, some feminists tout that female emancipation occurred in World War I thanks to their contribution to the war effort, which is tacitly referring to them shaming and murdering boys like Horace Isles with the white feather movement. It's important to be discerning when hearing feminists slip in their pro-genocide, pro-lynching, pro-war rhetoric. It all needs to be analyzed and studied, not dismissed or left to fester. Aside from the war, of course, there are other sneaky ways that trad cons and feminists like to pitch their misandrous ideas. For example, married men make more money, as opposed to men with more money get selected for marriage. That's what actually happens. Just like with how we have routinely heard the phrase, if the roles were reversed, it is useful for any stat worth their salt to imagine if instead of A causing B, if B could in fact be causing A. This is a fundamental thought process that is neglected in pretty much all of academia. Now, the takeaway. The lies and stats are designed to protect a specific status, but they can't change the underlying hardware. The facts about female on male violence and the true cost of state expansion eventually leak out because they are real. The tools to see through the institution are available to anyone willing to look. Sharpen your ability to look through data and papers from time to time. Feminists in general have gotten to be extremely sloppy in their rhetoric in academia. The truth doesn't need a peer review stamp to be real. It just needs someone with the courage to look at the raw numbers. Fantastic. I'd like to upvote this, but anyone show me how to upvote this? Like I can't even upvote this. Look. I can reply, I guess. But anyway, Alex Cat. This is some much important context. Okay, good. I find how academia is folded to the feminist pathetic. I agree. Right? Because men have folded, right? Feminists have damaged science with their hijacking. The soft sciences are completely ruined. They are. That's why sciences like, well, it's a pseudoscience, psychology, totally anti-man. Good fun right here. Good. Like I say, I can reply, write a reply, okay. Like again, I say I don't know how to upvote this, so the hell with it. Well, the point is, this is a good post, and it gives you a guy's room, for thought, right? Food for thought. Thank you. And we'll leave it at this.